before, my name's Josie Fraser and I'm Head of Digital Policy at the National Lottery Heritage Fund. One of the things that we've been focusing on is digital skills. And the reason for that is because obviously in order to support the sector in engaging with and using digital more confidently and more effectively for the whole range of issues that heritage organisations have to deal with, skills are really key to that, particularly staff skills, leadership skills, and skills of those who are helping out, such as volunteers as well. So the Digital Skills for Heritage program initiative is a kind of broad strokes program that looks at lots of things. We are supporting a whole range of packages that provide training, resources and activities relating to digital upskilling for the sector. We initially launched in February, right before we went into lockdown in March. So what we've done in response to the global crisis really is we have worked with all of our partners to look at how we can better support organisations in the current situation. And we all know that the pandemic's really accelerated the use of technology for everybody, not just heritage organisations, for everybody as individuals and as individuals and as in organisations during the crisis. So we're really there to help people, whatever the stage of their journey they're at, whether they're just getting started in specific ways of using digital, or whether they're further along in terms of their digital journey and their digital confidence. One of the things that we did to directly understand the sector better at this really difficult time was we made use of our digital survey baseline exercise, which is called the DASH survey. Many of you will have taken part in that and will be eagerly waiting for the first set of results, which we'll be releasing in October. We used that process to ask the sector really what kind of challenges it's facing right now in terms of digital and the kinds of things that it wanted to prioritise finding out about, understanding and getting on with at that initial stage of lockdown. And we've been tracking that throughout that period until quite recently when we closed the sign-ups for the survey. I think we had over 530 organisations contact us and tell us a huge amount about the things that they were looking at the moment. And from that, what we found was some specific gaps in the provision that we're putting through the Digital Skills for Heritage programme, but also just in terms of things that are easily available for our sector to be able to connect to. So some of the areas are quite there's a lot you can find out online about them, but if you're just getting started in that area, it's very difficult to know where to get started. So in response to that, we've commissioned a range of guides that are designed to support people at the beginning or maybe a little bit further along in their journey around some specific key issues. The ones that we've put out so far are working with children and young people, which addresses safeguarding issues, and privacy and security, which addresses a whole range of things to do with managing data online, handling data, and also things like looking after your communities in online events and preventing and responding to Zoom bombing attacks, for example. The one that we're launching today, and I'm very proud to be here and working in partnership with the Association for Learning Technology, is around learning resources and activities, online learning. The reason that we've highlighted and focused on this one as part of this first batch of 4 guides is because we were a little bit surprised by the level of interest in this area. A lot of it has got to do with the fact that the sector has shifted, and a lot of organisations were already engaged in learning activities through partnerships with schools, through information and activities that they provided on site. But obviously what's happened in lockdown is that they've had to rethink a lot of how they present and deliver and engage with those kinds of organisations, and how they transfer learning activities online. And obviously, as we all know, it's not a simple matter of doing what you were doing before, but in a Zoom conference. There's learning is a complex process. Teaching is an art, and there's kind of a lot of things to be mindful of when thinking about those things. The other issue that we picked up on is that a lot of organisations are looking potentially at learning resources and activities as either new services to help them deliver their mission, or new services that could potentially help them shore up revenue in future times. So a huge range of interest in this area, which is why we've prioritised this at this point to really help organisations get a kickstart on all of the kind of opportunities that there are around online learning. The next up in our series is around online accessibility, and I hope that you'll all be there to join us for that launch an event. We're really pleased with the resource that's come out of that one too. So I'm going to hand over to Marin, but I would just say that we are delighted again to be working in partnership with the Association of Learning Technology. They're the foremost organisation for learning technology in the UK. They're internationally recognised. The quality of the work is extremely high, and the network that they have established both across the UK and internationally is second to none. So we're really delighted and honoured to have the CEO, Marin Deepwell, join us today to talk about this new guide.
Thank you, Josie, and thank you very much for this really warm welcome. I'm delighted to be here with you all today, and I'm looking forward to giving you a whistle-stop tour to this new guide to online learning, which we hope will give you a starting point for either getting started with online learning if this is a new venture for you, or maybe developing your existing provision. So I've seen from the Padlet that there is a lot of different questions, and I hope that throughout the presentation, over the next 20 to 25 minutes, I'll be able to pick up some of your questions as we go along. But there'll be plenty of time for discussion at the end as well, and where possible, we'll try and post direct responses and links as well. So here goes. One of the really daunting challenges I think we found as a team was to look at the real wealth of knowledge that the heritage sector has to share with the world, particularly here in the UK. And we were very mindful of the vital role that you all play in enabling people of all ages to learn about and understand the UK's fascinating and complex history. So I must say we haven't taken this lightly, trying to give you tools and practical resources to get started with online learning. And I really hope you'll find the session today helpful and inspiring to get you started. Now, as Josie mentioned, the Association for Learning Technology is an independent charity and the UK's leading professional body for learning technology. Our members are largely people who deal with online learning day in, day out, and it's for them their main task in life, in a professional life. And we have tried as much as possible to collect the best tips and resources that are suitable for everyone to get started with in this guide. So I hope to pass on some of the distilled expertise of our network to you in the session today. I've actually worked for ALT since 2008, and in a previous life I was an anthropologist and worked quite a lot in different kind of heritage contexts. And my particular interest area is cemetery heritage. So if any of you are out there who are interested in talking gravestones, I will be available at the end of this webinar for sure. But now let me move on into introducing this new guide to get started with online learning. Now, at the heart of every venture in online learning, I think are really the learners, and that's what it's all about. And putting them at the heart of the process from the outside, you can't really go wrong with that. So we thought the first section of the guide should really focus on who your learners are and trying to really look at them and your audience and thinking, how can you most effectively and engagingly design resources for them specifically? So for example, if you have a very vocal community that would usually be able to come to see you in person, what opportunities can you give them to share their own ideas or opinions online, virtually, now that they might not be able to come in person? And how can you support collaboration and group work and also engage volunteers? So the kinds of questions that we're exploring in the guide and that we would suggest as starting points to really think about who your learners are and who you're designing your activities or resources for is to think about, if you have a specific number of participants in mind, for example, an individual or groups. Also, what's your expectation of your learner's digital skill level? And I think one of the questions in the Padlet that's come up is how to support learners who might have limited access to connectivity or to hardware, such as laptops or mobile devices. Also, another thing to consider is how people will learn from the resource or activity online. Is there a specific guided or facilitated type of activity, or might they be engaging at their own pace? And we'll be sharing some examples of both in this guide with you, so you could have a look at what other heritage organisations across the UK do in order to facilitate both. It's also important, particularly at this stage, when many people are not yet going out or engaging with public life as much as they normally do, where the learners are going to be. So at the moment, very few might be in a classroom or computer lab setting. More of them might be outdoors or at home, just as many of you must be now today as well. And then importantly, what kind of devices might learners have access to? And that is a very important consideration, particularly if you're trying to design the most equitable learning resources and activities. Throughout the guide, you will find pages such as these that give you links to additional resources from expert organizations and individuals to help you delve deeper into specific questions. So getting started with practical ways of helping you on the online learning journey. The guide also importantly covers some key concepts in online learning. And we appreciate that many of you may or may not have access to education officers or other experts that help you on your journey to designing online learning activities or resources. So we thought, while we can't cover everything that an expert would know, we certainly want to cover the key concepts when it comes to online pedagogy and what the different types of learning and methods of teaching might be that you could use and how to get started with them. Josie mentioned in her introduction that there are a number of other guides in this series that are coming out or have already come out that cover very important key consideration when designing online learning. And we're really delighted to be part of this wider series that will give you further guidance on key topics such as digital inclusion and accessibility, data protection, and safeguarding children and young people, because we weren't able to cover all of these separate topics in depth in one guide. So we're very much thinking you should use this online learning guide, as one of the series and try and draw on the whole series in order to get all the expertise that you need. There are a range of online learning modes, formats, and delivery that we hope you might be interested to explore and that you could consider in order to be able to decide what's best for your context, what works best in your specialist area. And the types of things that the guide walks you through exploring is when learning takes place, where it takes place, how it might be structured, how learning engages learners, how it will be recognized, and how it is designed. So those are the kind of starting points and key considerations that we hope you can explore with the help of this guide. Now, many of you might just be starting or scaling up your production of learning content, and it's really important at this stage to think about the licensing. How will your content be available? How will it be licensed? How can it make the best impact? So one of the parts that the guide covers is that open licenses ensure that your learning resources can be used and reused as widely as possible, enabling them to benefit as many people as possible. And the National Lottery Heritage Fund requires materials and funds to be openly licensed. Now, if you're new to online licensing or open licensing for learning materials, there is a wealth of resources to help you do just that. And it's very easy, clear walkthroughs from, for example, Creative Commons, who provide a range of introductory materials to help you understand and use the correct license for your context, for your organization, and for your business model. Meanwhile, the UK Copyright Literacy provides practical resources to help understanding how to use copyrighted materials for learning. And there are a number of free chapters of a new resource book that have just been published that we're linking to as well. So hopefully this will give you a good place to start thinking about the licensing of your learning resources and how to best incorporate that into your wider strategy. Now, building learning communities is a key part of online learning, not just in the heritage sector, but I imagine it'll be particularly relevant to many of you here in the room. And I imagine that at this stage, just like me, you're probably missing quite a lot of your face-to-face interactions with your communities and wondering how to engage them online. And one of the best ways to engage learners online is to get a shared sense of community and participation and belonging. And one of my key parts of my job is to generate just that. And it's not necessarily easy, but there is a lot of different strategies. And I think one of the questions that's come up in the Padlet as well is looking at how to engage, for example, different types of audiences, such as young adults aged 16 to 25. So there are a number of different strategies and different types of media that you could use to build your learning community and to get a sense of a shared undertaking. And we've explored a number of them in the guide. Sorry, was there a question, Josie, Harriet?
No, sorry, I think someone just joined with their mic on. No worries.
Oh, okay, no problem. I just wanted to make sure. We've also featured Whose Knowledge, which is a worldwide project to center the knowledge of marginalized communities online. And it provides resources, including a guide to building community knowledge. So if this is one of the areas in which you and your organizations are active, I really recommend you have a look at that and explore what they have done and how they build their learning communities. So there's a number of different strategies, as I mentioned. So one of these is social documents, such as shared or social documents, such as in Microsoft Teams or Google Docs or other Open Office, for example, where you are able to collaborate and use this as a tool for facilitating online learning and collaboration, where people can participate in their own time. Blogging is another very popular learning strategy. So for those of you who are new to blogging, that blog is a website where content is regularly updated by one or more authors. And in the guide, we explore some popular blogging platforms and give you examples of how to get started. And I think on the next slide or so, there's a couple of examples coming up, including one of my favorite ones that we found in Wales as part of our research for this guide. Also, social media and different hashtags on social media, including platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest, can be really useful tools for facilitating online learning. And there you might be able to build on social media engagement strategies you or your organization already have, or you could start a new one for specific learning and engagement. Importantly, also video and podcasts, and we have found some really exciting examples from the heritage sector to use conference platforms and live streaming to engage learners in different activities. So you can find a whole range of examples in the guide to explore. Here are some examples of heritage blogs that we've explored as part of the guide. One of them is Wales in Wales from the Sea Trust in Pembrokeshire, which is a really great example of engaging audiences of all ages in informal learning. So they, for example, share data on wildlife sightings, scientific data, and learning resources such as worksheets that learners can download and complete at home. Then there's also the Stories of Scotland podcast that explores some of the forgotten and misrepresented events in Scottish history. They also have a blog where they used to share information about the latest episodes of their podcast. And I've also included a little screenshot there of a site called Untold Lives, which is a blog from the British Library that shares overlooked and forgotten lives and stories from around the world. All of these, I think, hopefully provide you with a starting point for a bit of inspiration to find your own approach right for your organization. Further on social media as well, if you haven't already discovered it, I'd encourage you to explore the hashtag Museums Unlocked, where many museums, but also other heritage organizations, have been actively sharing throughout the lockdown. So if you'd like to get started somewhere and you're a bit unsure, this would be a great hashtag to get you started and explore a whole range of different approaches. Now, one of the examples from the guide is from Rebecca Bailey from Towards a National Collection, a program director there, where they used video communication to facilitate speed dating for heritage researchers in their organization. And in the guide, that was one of the examples we wanted to feature as someone who organization that used the tool like Zoom to really scale up engagement with their community. And it was fantastic to see such a kind of, in some ways, straightforward approach. And I also wanted to highlight the, there we go, the Digital Heritage Lab, which is a really important new resource, a digital skills development program for small and medium heritage organization here in the UK, also funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. So I'd like to encourage you to have a look at that when you're starting to think about how to build your learning communities and what skills you might need to do that. Now, one of the things I'm aware of will be of great interest to all of you is how to create learning content, and particularly how to include that in your learning and business strategies. And the guide features a whole list of resources to get started with engaging learning content in a range of formats. We've included a list of popular tools to create, for example, visual content such as photos, collages, or animations, quizzes and polls, presentations, ebooks, pinboards, video for live streaming and recording, and also audio for things such as audio tours or podcasts, with I think some of you may already have been experimenting with and would maybe now expand. There's many resources out there, and one of the things my organization does is to present case studies of what works and what doesn't work in our blog that is freely accessible to all. So if there's a particular thing, for example, Padlet for online pinboards like we're using today, and you're looking for examples of how to use it in a learning context, please feel free to visit the blog to explore further. Now, also in the Padlet was a question around evaluating your learning content. And I think that is a really important undertaking that will depend a lot on the context and what your strategic aims are in order to deliver learning. But we did want to at least provide some starting points, both for tools and for areas in which you might need to go in order to evaluate your learning content. So we would start by thinking about the information you will need to collect from the outset as you design your activities or resources, how you will gather it and how you will analyze it. So for example, you may use polling tools that we featured in the guide, such as Mentimeter or Poll Everywhere, to find out how learners rated the learning experience. And this might be differing depending on different circumstances or demographics, which is where thinking back to the important issues we highlighted earlier, data protection, safeguarding, will come back in. And all hangs together when you start thinking about collecting data about your learners. And also what tools can you use to gather the information you need. So you might use online survey tools to ask your learners to evaluate, such as SurveyMonkey and Smart Survey. There is a huge amount that will depend on the context of your learning, and also what you're trying to achieve with it and who your audience is. So if you've thought carefully about who your learners are and how to engage them, then hopefully that will give you a strong foundation on which to build your evaluation. Thinking about impact a little bit more and how your learning activities or resources could increase the impact of the work that you're doing, one of the areas that the guide explores is contributing to open knowledge initiatives. And we feel that in many instances where resources are limited in particular, linking your learning activities to existing initiatives such as open competitions, editathons, or data visualization projects can provide a really effective and particularly cost-effective way to create more engagement and impact. And we featured a number of them in the guide, and one of them I hope that some of you might be familiar with is Wiki Loves Monuments, which is an annual international photography competition which takes place every September. Also, I wanted to introduce you more to Wikidata, which is a free and open knowledge database that can be read and edited by both humans and machines. And to try and explore this a little bit more and make it a bit less abstract, one of the examples we feature in the guide is a project called Witchfinder General, which made an interactive map using Wikidata to show the Scottish witchcraft database. If you'd like to get a bit of a feel for how a database like Wikidata is used in practice, this could be a really good one to explore. Editathons, which a few years ago, I must be honest, I hadn't really met many yet, are becoming more and more popular as more people collaborate online. And particularly in the heritage context, there's many examples of people coming together online to work together to, for example, edit Wikipedia or collaborate together on other open knowledge projects. And some of the examples from the heritage sector that we included in the guide is the Dumfries Stone Carving Project and also Women in Red. Now, as you can see, the Dumfries Stone Carving Project took a blended approach and brought together young people in person as well, but then also had an online component, so a blended approach where they could collaborate together online. And this might be a good way for you to consider approaching planning forward for online learning for the next year, is to see how some online and face-to-face, when we can do that again, components might work together. Now, in the last section of the guide, and before we go to our Q&A, I wanted to just highlight other online heritage learning projects that particularly during lockdown have produced some amazing online learning. And I know that one of the questions in the guide was on examples to explore from other organizations. So we wanted to try and feature as many as possible in the guide. And there is a couple here on this page in particular for you to explore. One of them is, I think, a really innovative and unusual creation of a virtual river, bringing together 900 voices from a particular river valley where there's audio and video content, really interesting stories, bringing heritage from across the valley together. It's a really interesting collaboration. But there's also other larger scale projects using innovative technologies such as augmented and virtual reality, including the Seek Museum initiative, which has created projects that brings artifacts and relics to life, where you can do a 3D exploration, exploring things like swords and jewelry. And also, if you fancy exploring something a little bit larger, you can now visit the 3D model of Edinburgh Castle, which is also, I think, just there in the corner of the screen as an example of a virtual tour that gives a really immersive experience to visitors. But the last example I want to feature before we go to the Q&A, which I personally found really inspiring and which we've been really fortunate to learn a lot from for this guide, is the virtual museum set up by the Lisbon Museum and the Irish Linen Centre and Lisbon Museum. And I think they've taken a really interested approach, bringing together a lot of the approaches that we've just discussed, anything from worksheets and virtual jigsaws to virtual craft activities and tours. They have a blog and a really interesting social media strategy as well. Bringing together a lot of resources that their audience, including school children and parents, can really interact with from home and bring a little bit of the museum into their community, but also support schools and public sector organizations to explore heritage online through online learning. So with that, I think I'd like to pause here and see, together with Harriet and Josie, what questions you might have.
Thank you, Maren. Josie, if you want to also pop on your camera, we will see what Padlet questions we've got. Thank you for already addressing some of them as you went, and apologies if I reiterate. Oh, if there's any additional points you want to raise, please do. The first one that got the most likes was, sorry, bear with me, was about equal access and how can we include people who have limited access to data and equipment. I think you're on mute.
I'm happy to go first, Maren, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
So this is obviously a recurring question that we have, not just to do with online learning, but with all kinds of approaches to digital, because obviously there is a digital divide. It is a minority of the total population that are impacted. However, that's not to say that that isn't an important group, and they tend to fall into three key groups that we know of. One is through people that can't access because of reasons of poverty, primarily. One is because of people who can't access because they just really can't see the point, and they, you know, and that's a smaller group, but it's still quite an important group. Although my kind of guess is that group's changed in size a little bit during the current situation, when there's been many compelling reasons to attempt to get online. And then three, the other group is around geography. So I just don't have good enough network access in the place that I am, and lots of parts of the UK are affected by that as well. So there's those three groups within that kind of excluded groups that we can talk about. Obviously, the National Lottery Heritage Fund is not an organisation that explicitly is designed to address the digital design or digital inclusion, but we do factor that into all the work that we do here, particularly around digital, and we do think about that very carefully. It's certainly not a reason to not go ahead with providing digital initiatives and resources, because we do know that many communities, including very underserved communities, massively benefit from access to digital resources and activities. So it's not a question that by doing that we're letting everybody down. But obviously, what we don't want to do is exacerbate the impact of that digital divide and in any way make life worse for the people who already don't have that kind of access. So we do need to think carefully around our resources, particularly at a time of national access issues. And I know that the government and various organisations are looking carefully at how to get devices and connectivity to individuals and organisations at the moment, and I think that will continue to be a theme as we go forward through into the kind of recovery phase of the current situation, and hopefully that will have some tangible impacts and help. There are creative ways of addressing those issues, though. I'll just mention one that I saw that I loved, and I'm really sorry if the person behind this is actually in the room, because I can't remember it in as much detail off the top of my head as I would like to about it. But there is actually people using an art by post kind of initiative where you'd sign up and you'd actually get a letter telling you what your activity or your task for that time was, and you can do it at home and you can post it on. So there is lots and lots of ways of kind of creatively addressing these issues. But I think ultimately we need to recognise that this is a fundamental social issue that is wider than the heritage sector, wider than even the learning sector, which is massive. And we do have to be mindful of, and you know, we need to support people that are well placed to address that as we go forward.
Maybe if I can add just a few practical hints and tips as well, specific like to online learning. One of the things we've included in the guide is some links to looking at making materials and content that learners can use in their own time, particularly keeping it fairly small files. So for example, providing the transcript to a video as a document someone might be able to download and read rather than watch a video is a really helpful way in making, you know, something more easily accessible, particularly when there's connectivity issues. Then there's other, I think, other hints and tips, such as narrating very clear instructions to learners, and particularly providing sort of frequent signposting and really clear communication. And also, you know, just doing really basic, in some ways, things like labeling files and documents such as worksheets or images really clearly, so that someone who isn't able to log in or participate fully when you think they should, or when you've planned for them to, they might have to do it at a different time, that they can still make use of the resources and really get some learning out of the resources at their own pace.
I'd just quickly add as well, in terms of accessibility for people who have disabilities, that's obviously a whole complex field as well, and we are really pleased to be helping out more with that. And please do come along, look out for our next guide, which is focusing specifically on online accessibility issues to support people with a range of disabilities.
Thank you. Next question. I know we've kind of covered this, and there'll be lots of examples in the guides, but the second most liked question was about which heritage organisations do you think produced high quality online learning activities? And somebody had added a follow-up question that was, they would be particularly interested in sites that excel in engaging 16 to 25-year-olds. I know I've put you a bit on the spot there, but if you do have any that we could share, that would be great.
Well, I think it's been really inspiring to see how many heritage organisations have risen to the challenge and produced some outstanding work throughout lockdown. And obviously, the more resources you have, the bigger an organisation you are, the more possible that becomes. I think really having a look at the example that's right on the screen, the virtual museum from the Irish Linen Centre and Lisburn Museum is really interesting. There is a lot to explore on that side, particularly, including some really kooky arts and crafts projects that I think would be great for that kind of age group. So I would strongly suggest you have a real delve down. They've also had some really interesting sort of activities that you can do in your community on social media. So they have a little mascot that travels around their community in safe, socially distanced walks, and they encourage users to post photos. And there's a lot of examples in there, particularly using Twitter or other social media such as Instagram, where posting something around the particular topic, or maybe with a mascot, or like, for example, thing featuring a penguin or a whale, has really taken off. So I'd really encourage you to have a look at that. And some of the Digital River project as well that we mentioned earlier, there's a link to that in the guide. That has also engaged a lot of young people, which is really, really interesting. So those are the two examples that come to mind. And if you have a look at Museums Unlocked on Twitter, this would maybe be a third example where you can have a look at, you know, a lot of young audience engagement. One thing I would maybe say as well is that we've included in the guide some really good resources to creating different types of social media content from experts from around online learning, particularly how to use platforms like Instagram and TikTok and other kind of video-based platforms. So I'll post a few more links in the Padlet for you as well.
Josie, do you want to add any? Or?
Yeah, I will do. So one of the things I'd say is that, and this is the advice that everybody gives to people who are going, oh, I think I'd like to write a book. Well, the important thing is read some books. So if you're really wanting to find out what you think works well in terms of online learning and what might chime for your community, if you might be somebody who's representative of that community, well, why not leap in? Try out a load of online learning things, try different formats, try different activities, see how much you learn, see how much you enjoy learning, and that'll help build up your kind of knowledge base of the tools and techniques and practices that are useful. And also you can, work with that critically and think, well, I would have done that slightly better, or I think if we tweak this, that would work for those people. I think, I had a great time in Pride Month going along to a lot of online tours and talks around LGBTQ plus community and history, and they were really good fun. I really actually enjoyed quite a lot of them, and I learned a huge amount myself about effective learning delivery and how that can be designed and thought through. And I actually paid for most of those sessions as well. And it was really money well spent, I think. I learned a huge amount and enjoyed myself in the process. The thing that I would say around children and young people in particular is that, ask some children and young people. Don't just ask us, because, while we have opinions and experiences and we can give advice and point you in the direction, actually, if that's the kind of community that you really want to work with and develop partnerships with, so whether that's partnerships with schools or whether that's developing work with children and young people groups or designing work specifically to support them, get some children and young people on board to actually do some of that evaluation work, ask them what they think about it, help bring them into the design process as well as into the research process.
Thank you. Our next most liked question was one that I'm sure quite a lot of people will relate to at the moment, and it's that they're not sure that they necessarily have the skills it takes to create content or learning activities. Have you got any advice about how they start that?
Sure, I'll get started, and maybe I'm sure Josie has some thoughts as well. I think, if you are starting from scratch, you're not an expert, you can absolutely get started, but you might start with less is more and start with something that you're really passionate about or already familiar with. So, for example, some of the really engaging approaches that we've seen, such as creating posts on, a picture a day with questions or information about a particular fact or a particular story, could be a really engaging way to get started. Or have a look at some of the examples of the worksheets from different organizations, such as the ones featured in the guide, and have a think about whether this could be suitable. But starting to think about your audience is, I think, key, because many people rush into online learning and their focus is really on content rather than what they really want to achieve with the content. And they're then disappointed if not many people use the content or they're not sure how to reach the audience. But it's often because they've not really thought enough about who they want to reach and why and what they want the output to be. So my suggestion would be to not start with creating content first, but to think, what do you want to achieve? Who do you want to engage? And use that as your starting point before you think about, what the content is. And coming back to Josie's comment just now, if you're not sure, then trying to reach those people who you're hoping to engage, whether that's a specific age group or a specific geographic group or a wider audience, and involving them could be a really helpful way to be more collaborative in designing your online learning. On a more practical note, just to finish off, there are a range of online courses that range from, you know, for experts to complete beginners. And there's one course in particular that I wanted to recommend, which is featured in the guide, which is called the Blended Learning Essentials course, which is really different learning contexts. Some of them may be more formal education, but also work-based learning. And it really walks you through a lot of basics to get started step by step with real individuals holding technology and showing you how it works. So if you're not sure at all where to start, this course, it's free to access to anyone and it's currently available, would be a great way to get started. And there's also the Enhanced Digital Teaching Platform from the Education and Training Foundation, which provides sort of bite-sized, small, usually video-based resources to help you on any topic, from designing a document to creating a video to the question, what's VR and AR, and exploring that at your own pace. So try and engage with some of the free resources that are available to help build your digital skills.
Josie, would you like to add anything? Oh, yeah.
I will do. Thanks, Harriet. Obviously, an ideal place to get started is with our brand new guide, because this is exactly designed to answer this question. And it's a really, really hard question because we are a massive, diverse sector, and the types of learning activity that people in organisations will want to carry out are huge, and they'll range from very small, informal, fun things to actually much more formal, complex things. In line with what Marion said, don't be overambitious to start with. Don't run before you can walk. Think about smaller things. And, you know, I would be surprised if there's anybody in this room that hasn't become somewhat of an online quiz expert during the last 2 months and hasn't experienced a whole array of different kind of quiz formats. And, you know, all of that is about learning and about kind of reiterating things and recalling. So you probably have more resources and more experience than you imagine actually to already draw on from the process of going to all of those family quizzes and actually putting them on for your friends and family as well. And another thing that I'd say is there's some amazing existing projects that will help you expand your reach very, very quickly without you having to worry about the infrastructure. And the obvious one that will spring to mind for everyone is Wikipedia. You know, so we've talked a little bit about the other open projects attached to Wikipedia. Lots and lots of our projects contribute images, for example, to Wiki Commons. And that's how the Wiki Loves Monuments programme works. And basically what you're doing there is you are enabling people globally to call on those resources and to learn about those objects, stories, assets, whatever it is that you are putting into those places. So, you know, even small things like uploading a few images to Wikipedia, to Wiki Commons, that will then be used on stories in Wikipedia that don't currently have any images attached to them, will make a huge difference to the quality of learning activity that will go on, and to the information that people can find out. So you don't always have to do everything yourself from scratch. There's very often some really good you know, credible projects that you can contribute to, or you and your community can contribute to, as a way of learning and also sharing and helping other people to learn about the things that you're passionate about.
Maren, we just had a follow-up question asking about whether the blended learning course you suggested, is that a Future Learn one?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, it's on Future Learn and it has 4 different parts. The first one is getting started and then it moves on from there. So if you're looking for somewhere to get started, the link is in the guide as well. I would suggest the Blended Learning Essentials course.
Yeah, and I've just noticed another question, and we will be sharing the recording afterwards as well. So if you have missed anything today, you can rewatch it or you can refer to the guide. Our next question is about school sessions, and our school sessions are hands-on and involve multi-sensory activities. How can we offer something similarly engaging to our younger learners? Maren, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, So I think that is a really challenging field to work in, and there are a number of strategies that I think, depend a lot also on what kind of context your normal school cohorts work with. But there's a huge amount that I think you can do in collaboration with schools and teachers. And actually, the virtual museum that we were just looking at earlier, they've really done a lot of different school activities. So, and they've also done things like circulating objects by post, and they're being clean kind of in between. But I think different types of worksheets where, for example, students can maybe draw things or interact with things online and then maybe upload images, or also go into their natural or local environment, or even gardens, balconies, kitchens, and making something. I think the key is really to creatively think about, where's my learner, in this case, a school child, what resources or things do they maybe have access to, what is commonly available, maybe in their homes, and trying to think of ways they can contribute back. And we've seen a lot of collaborative models working a lot better for younger learners than the sort of straightforward, for example, if you had like a video or something they just had to watch and sit through. So try and think of collaborative ways in which they could get involved and they can share something back. And a lot of, I think, well, a lot of the parents that I work with at the moment have found it really helpful if their children have creative challenges. So whether it's to make something, like fold something from a piece of paper, or create something that they can then contribute back into the learning process, that seems to work really well. And the other strategy is, of course, to also try and think about working with schools who will already have some sort of delivery mode in which they teach children remotely. So there's always opportunities to work closely with them and ask them what sort of content would they find helpful, what sort of ideas would they find helpful, so that if you're a small or medium-sized organization, you don't necessarily have to provide all the infrastructure. I do want to highlight that the guide on safeguarding and keeping children and young people online is your essential tool to getting started with that, because there's a lot to think about when you start getting young people to collaborate online. And I wonder if Josie has any input into that question as well.
Thanks, Maren, and thanks for flagging our excellent online working with children and young people online guide. But it is really, really important that you understand the safeguarding issues if you are going to work with children and young people, particularly in ways where you're managing data or collaborating and communicating with them. The first thing that I would say is don't feel bound necessarily by trying to replicate what you have done in physical environments. Digital is not best used just to try and approximate physical experiences, and they're not necessarily the things that work best online at all. So don't be afraid of actually having a rethink about kind of how and what it is you want to get out of the whole process, and understanding a little bit more about the affordances of technology and what works really well and what doesn't work so well will help you. I think Maren's points about having activities that are not screen-based but a kind of a blended learning approach where you're getting young people to go off and do activities or create things or find things, those kinds of things are great. And I think also, like, there's kind of active things that you can do online, so you can structure online experiences quite actively. So for example, web quests, I don't know if people in the room are familiar with them, but they're basically kind of treasure trails where you support your audience, whether they're young people or not, in going from website to website and finding out the clues as they go. Those kinds of things are great, as are kind of more interesting and active experiences of online meetings, because I know we've all sat through a million Zoom meetings and other meetings, and we're professionals, we're putting a brave face on it all. Obviously children and young people not always as restrained in their criticism of the same old format all the time as we are as adults. So, you know, have a look at mixing it up. I've done the other things I've done while I've been in lockdown is I've done some like online murder mystery things. I've done a whole load of things, really, basically having fun and trying out what kind of formats are shifting online. And some things work really, really well, you know, and the most webinars have the facility to do small group working as well. So, you know, understand your platform, get the most out of it.
Thank you, Josie. I think we've got time for one very quick question and then we'll wrap up. And it's just, we don't have a lot of resources. How can I make online learning cost effective? Maren, do you want to take that one?
Sure. You know, it's a really common situation, and the good news is that there's a lot of openly licensed resources already out there that you can adapt. So in the guide, there's a number of different sites to explore where you might be able to find resources that you can just remix so you don't have to start from scratch. Also, I think a lot of people think about online learning as just being video. And I think if we can't afford to make glitzy videos, then somehow we can't do good online learning. And I think that's a bad myth. So you can definitely do online learning without creating any videos whatsoever and use other tools and resources that are free and openly available, such as social media sites, shared documents, and quizzes and polls, in order to try and really bring your particular organization's work to life and make it a really engaging learning experience. The key is to try and be very clear, give practical instructions to learners as to what they want to do, and try and do that as consistently as possible. And there will be really good engagement as a result. I think there's real video fatigue, so don't be daunted if your budget is small.
I feel a bit guilty now that I've criticised video so much. No, I'm not suffering from video fatigue at all. I'm loving it. I'm loving all of it, especially this session. I think that's absolutely right, Maren. One of the reasons I love technology is because I truly think it does level the playing field for people who haven't got a lot of resources. There are lots of very impactful, powerful things that you can do with low to no budgets using technology. You know, there's websites, using social media, creating resources. There's lots of very, very cost-effective ways of doing things that look really good and actually get out there to lots of people.
Thank you, guys. I'm really sorry we've rapidly ran out of time there and there's still loads of questions. What we'll do is we'll put the answers on the Padlet, so please do check back at the Padlet and if your question hasn't been answered. I've also on the screen at the moment there is a link to a smart survey. We'd really appreciate it if you could fill that in for us and give us some feedback on how you think these sessions are going. A huge thank you to Maren and a huge thank you to Josie. Thank you for answering everybody's questions, and thank you everybody. I hope you have a lovely rest of the day.